How do you sleep at night knowing that a little girl, a little disabled girl, was cut into pieces and thrown away?
It should have been a story of survival. Zahra Baker was born in Australia in 2000, and from the start, life tested her more than most children ever endure. By the time she was 5, Zahra had endured treatment for cancer and began using a prosthetic leg. She faced years of difficult hospital visits, exhausting procedures, and a battle that would have broken most adults. But Zahra was different. She was known for her bright smile, her resilience, her positivity. Teachers, neighbors, and friends described her as the happiest child in the room, despite everything she had been through. When her father, Adam Baker, moved her to North Carolina after remarrying an American woman named Elisa, the world expected Zahra's story to finally turn toward peace and stability. Instead, it ended in betrayal, horror, and dismemberment at the hands of the one woman who should have been protecting her. On October 9, 2010, Adam and Elisa reported Zahra missing from their Hickory, North Carolina home. Elisa spun a dramatic story. A ransom note had been left demanding money, supposedly connected to Adam's boss. At first, it looked like a kidnapping. Police swarmed the area. Local media carried the urgent missing child alerts. Search teams scoured the woods. But from the beginning, nothing added up. Detectives noticed that the ransom note was oddly specific, yet suspiciously sloppy. When they traced it back, they found it had been written on paper torn from Elisa's own notebook. The so-called kidnapper didn't exist. And Elisa? She failed a polygraph almost immediately. Neighbors and teachers came forward with disturbing stories. They claimed Zahra was being abused. She showed up to school with unexplained injuries. A social worker had even been called months earlier because Zahra was often kept at home for long stretches. Elisa's explanation? She said, Zahra was too sick, too fragile, but the truth was far darker. 2 weeks after Zahra's disappearance, the search took a grisly turn. Investigators discovered a prosthetic leg dumped in a wooded area. Serial numbers confirmed it belonged to Zahra. From there, search teams began uncovering human remains scattered across Caldwell County. A skull fragment here, a bone there. It was a dismemberment, and it was deliberate. When the evidence closed in, Elisa Baker cracked. She admitted she had written the ransom note, and she confessed to helping cover up Zahra's death. But as with many cases like this, she tried to shift blame. Elisa pointed the finger at Adam, claiming he had killed his daughter, and she had only helped dispose of the body. Adam denied it. No evidence ever tied him directly to the murder, and he was never charged in Zahra's death. The weight of responsibility remained squarely on Elisa. What makes the case even more disturbing is that Zahra didn't just vanish overnight. Evidence showed she endured a long period of abuse and neglect before her death. Court records revealed that Elisa was addicted to painkillers, that she had a history of manipulative relationships, and that she had no biological connection to Zahra. The little girl was seen not as a child to be loved, but as an obstacle, a responsibility Elisa didn't want. The court proceedings were chilling. In 2013, Elisa Baker pled guilty to second-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and charges related to the dismemberment of Zahra's body. She received a sentence of 15 to 18 years for the murder, on top of a 10-year sentence for federal drug charges. For many, it was insultingly light. A maximum of less than 30 years for a crime this brutal. Zahra's biological mother in Australia, who had been fighting to regain custody, said what many were thinking. No sentence could ever balance the scales for what had been taken. The public's outrage wasn't just about the crime. It was about the betrayal. Zahra was a child who had fought cancer, learned to walk with a prosthetic, and faced more hardship than most adults. And she had done it with joy, with resilience. And then, the one person entrusted to give her safety and care, the woman called Mum, ended her story with cruelty, almost too gruesome to believe. The media branded Elisa Baker the evil stepmother, and it stuck. Her mugshot, with its defiant scowl, became the face of betrayal. Even today, people who followed the case still struggle with it. They ask how Adam Baker could have been so blind. They ask why social services didn't intervene earlier when signs of abuse were so obvious. And most of all, they ask how a child who had survived so much could have been destroyed not by illness, but by the woman who should have loved her most. Zahra's remains were cremated, and part of her ashes were returned to Australia, where her family built a memorial. In North Carolina, a community garden was dedicated in her honor, filled with flowers and butterflies, symbols of the joy and strength she carried, even in her short life. But Elisa Baker will always be remembered differently, not just as a murderer, but as the embodiment of the nightmare that children whisper about in fairy tales, the wicked stepmother. Except this wasn't a storybook. This was real, and the scars it left stretched from the small town of Hickory all the way to Australia.
And when I told the police what I had discovered about her past, she was just like, I can't believe you would tell them that. And I told him, I said, I had nothing to hide, and I didn't think that you did either.
In Texas, 2012, a 6-year-old boy named Taylor Syring walked down to the beach with his stepmother. He never came back alive. The boy had been in Laura Day's care for less than a year. She was newly married to Taylor's father, Candice Syring, and eager to play the part of the loving stepmom. But appearances, as this case revealed, can be a mask, and behind Laura Day's mask was a predator hiding in plain sight. On October 5th, 2012, Laura called 911 from a Corpus Christi hospital. She told paramedics that Taylor had drowned during a beach outing. Her story sounded strange from the start. Laura claimed she had taken Taylor to the Gulf of Mexico that afternoon. According to her, Taylor ran into the waves, swallowed water, and went under before she could save him. She insisted she pulled him out, raced to the car, and drove him straight to the hospital. But doctors quickly realized something was off. Taylor's body didn't show the signs of a typical drowning. There was little sand in his airway, and no major fluid in his lungs. His father, Cotton, later testified that Taylor had been an excellent swimmer for his age, with regular swim lessons. So how did a boy who knew the water so well suddenly drown, while with a woman who had just entered his life? Police began digging into Laura Day's background, and the truth unraveled like a nightmare. It turned out Laura wasn't just a new wife trying to win over her stepson. She was a convicted killer. Decades earlier, in 1982, Laura had been convicted of murdering her ex-boyfriend in Harris County, Texas. She shot him dead during a dispute and served 2 years in prison before her sentence was reduced on appeal. She had carried that secret into her new marriage, hiding her past from Candice Syring. Detectives also discovered disturbing online activity. Laura had been searching for horoscopes, New Age beliefs, and reincarnation theories. One chilling theory investigators floated: Laura believed Taylor's soul would return in another form, and his death wouldn't be the end. In her twisted thinking, killing him wasn't murder, it was transformation. At trial in 2013, prosecutors laid out their case. Laura Day had intentionally drowned Taylor Syring. They showed inconsistencies in her story, pointing out how she had bypassed a closer hospital and driven almost 15 minutes farther to one where Taylor arrived with no pulse. They highlighted how she failed to call 911 during the drive, something any panicked caretaker would have done. Most damning was her demeanor. Witnesses said Laura didn't act like a grieving stepmother. Instead, she was eerily calm, detached, and even flirtatious in her interactions after Taylor's death. One nurse testified that she seemed more concerned about herself than the dying child on the table. When Laura took the stand, she painted herself as misunderstood. She claimed she loved Taylor, that she had tried desperately to save him, and that her criminal past was irrelevant. But the jury didn't buy it. They found her guilty of capital murder, and the judge handed down the harshest penalty available: life in prison without parole, Laura Day would never walk free again. For the Syring family, the pain was immeasurable. Cotton had lost his only son, and the betrayal cut deep. He had trusted Laura, welcomed her into Taylor's life, and believed she would be a protector. Instead, she became the reason his boy was buried. The case gained national attention thanks to its bizarre twists. One of the most haunting details is how fast it all happened. Taylor Syring was only 6 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. School, friends, baseball, birthdays, and within months of Laura Day entering his life, it was over. In sentencing remarks, the judge said, Laura's crime was particularly heinous because of the betrayal of trust. A stepmother is supposed to guard, to nurture, to protect. Instead, Laura exploited her role to isolate Taylor and end his life. To this day, there's debate about Laura Day's true motive. Was it jealousy of the bond between father and son? Was it resentment of the responsibility? Or was it, as prosecutors suggested, a twisted belief system that justified murder as a spiritual act? Whatever the motive, the result is the same. A little boy robbed of his future and a family left with scars that will never heal. December 2018, Effingham County, Georgia. Deputies arrived at the Crocker home for what was supposed to be a routine welfare check. Instead, they uncovered one of the most disturbing child abuse cases the state had ever seen. The visit began with questions about two children, Mary Crocker, 14 years old, and her brother Elwyn J.R. Crocker Jr., 16. Neighbors had been asking where the siblings were. Some hadn't seen them in years. Their father, Elwyn Crocker Sr., offered shifting explanations. Their stepmother, Candice Crocker, said little. Deputies grew suspicious, and with a search warrant, they turned their attention to the backyard. Under patches of freshly disturbed dirt, investigators unearthed a shallow grave. Inside were the skeletal remains of Mary Crocker. Hours later, a second grave revealed the body of J.R. Both children had been buried just steps from the family's home, hidden in the soil, while Candice, their stepmother, lived freely above them. The discovery shocked the community. These weren't runaways. These weren't accidents. This was a cover-up of long-term abuse, ending in murder and secret burials in the family's own yard. As investigators dug deeper, the truth emerged. The Crocker household was a nightmare. Testimony revealed Mary had been kept in a dog cage for hours and beaten with belts and pipes. She was starved, denied basic medical care, and routinely humiliated. J.R. endured the same. Both children slowly wasted away, their deaths caused by prolonged abuse and neglect. Neighbors admitted they noticed warning signs. They saw Mary looking thin and withdrawn. Some suspected abuse, but never pressed. With no consistent oversight from schools or child protection services, the children remained trapped inside the Crocker home, living under the rule of their father and stepmother. When deputies entered the house after finding the graves, they discovered other children still living there. One was disabled, and both were described as living in inhumane conditions. Those children were immediately removed and placed into protective care. The question wasn't whether Candice Crocker was guilty. It was how far her involvement went. Prosecutors laid out evidence that she didn't just stay silent, she actively joined in. She enforced punishments, withheld food, and participated in the concealment of both deaths. Witnesses described her as cold and detached, a woman who had chosen loyalty to her husband over the survival of the children in her care. The case moved quickly through the courts. In 2022, Candice Crocker pled guilty to murder, child cruelty, and concealing a death. The judge sentenced her to life without parole. At sentencing, prosecutors emphasized her failure to act, saying she could have picked up a phone, called authorities, and saved 2 lives. Instead, she chose silence, complicity, and ultimately, participation. The visuals of the case were unforgettable. Local TV cameras captured investigators working under floodlights in the Crocker backyard, evidence tents set up over patches of dirt, deputies in gloves pulling up bone fragments. The coroner's van waited as bags of remains were carried away. Those images circulated nationally, symbols of a hidden horror exposed. The outrage intensified when reporters uncovered Elwyn Sr.'s background. Before moving to Effingham County, he had worked jobs as a Walmart clerk and even as Santa Claus at a Disney theme park. To the outside world, he had played roles of warmth and trust. Inside the home, he and Candice created an environment of cruelty and death. For Candice Crocker, the knife sentence ended her part in the story. But the case itself isn't finished. Elwyn Crocker Sr. still faces the death penalty. Every update on his trial drags Candice's name back into headlines, keeping her branded as the stepmother who lived on top of 2 hidden graves. The case raises painful questions. How could Mary and JR disappear for years without triggering alarms? How could no one notice they weren't enrolled in school or receiving medical care? How did 2 children waste away and die while neighbors and agencies failed to intervene? In the end, the blame belongs to those inside the house. Candice Crocker wasn't a passive figure. She chose silence when the abuse began. She chose complicity when the beatings escalated. And she chose concealment when 2 children were buried under the soil behind her home. Today, the backyard looks ordinary again. Grass covers the graves. The house stands quiet. But beneath that ground is a story that will never be forgotten. 2 children whose lives ended in starvation, beatings, and silence. 2 children betrayed by the woman who was supposed to protect them.
Okay. And what was the reason we were checking on them?
Concerns that the children aren't being fed.
And done it. I just can't let this go any longer. Those kids, I think, is in very serious danger.
March 26th, 2018. A white SUV was found at the bottom of a cliff in Mendocino County, California. 8 people had been inside. 6 children, 2 adults. All dead. At first glance, it looked like a tragic accident. A family road trip gone wrong. But within days, investigators realized it wasn't an accident at all. It was murder-suicide, driven by the adoptive mother who was supposed to protect those children, Jennifer Hart. Jennifer and her wife, Sara Hart, were already known on the surface as a picture-perfect couple. They were white, progressive, vegan, living in Washington state with 6 adopted black children. Their Facebook pages showed smiling family photos, kids holding hands at music festivals, matching t-shirts, messages about love, peace, and togetherness. Friends described them as the ideal parents. But behind those curated posts was a nightmare of control, starvation, and abuse. The children, Marcus, Hannah, Devonte, Abigail, Jeremiah, and Sierra, had been adopted from foster care in Texas. Their biological families were poor, struggling, and vulnerable, and the Harts presented themselves as saviors. But once the children were in their home, the reality was very different. Teachers reported the kids came to school hungry, begging for food from classmates. Hannah once showed up with bruises and told a nurse she had been hit with a belt. Devonte, the most outspoken of the siblings, asked neighbors for meals and confided that he and the others were being denied food. Every time authorities got close, Jennifer and Sara pulled the kids out of school, cut off contact, and moved states. The most infamous moment came in 2014, years before the crash. During protests in Portland, a photo of Devonte went viral. He was shown hugging a police officer, tears streaming down his face. That image was shared worldwide as a symbol of racial healing. What people didn't know was that Devonte had been forced into that moment by Jennifer. Later, he begged neighbors not to believe the online image, telling them things at home were not what they seemed. By 2017, the warning signs were piling up. Child Protective Services in Washington launched investigations into abuse and neglect. Neighbors in Woodland reported the children were too thin and desperate. CPS visited the home multiple times. Each time, the Harts dodged or delayed. But in March 2018, the pressure mounted. The agency left a card on the door, planning to return the next day. Jennifer and Sara knew they were out of time. That night, they packed the kids into the family SUV. There was no vacation, no trip planned. Instead, Jennifer Hart got behind the wheel and drove south into California. Along a remote stretch of Highway 1, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, she steered the vehicle straight off a 100-foot cliff. The crash was catastrophic. The SUV landed upside down on the rocks below. Jennifer and Sara died instantly. Several of the children's bodies were found near the wreckage. Others were swept out to sea, their remains never recovered. Devontae's body was never found. Toxicology reports revealed chilling details. Sara Hart had high levels of Benadryl in her system, suggesting she had been drugged. The children also had traces in their blood, strong enough to make them drowsy, but not lethal. Jennifer, the driver, was heavily intoxicated. Her blood alcohol level was over the legal limit. This wasn't carelessness. This was planned. Investigators ruled it murder-suicide. Jennifer Hart had deliberately drugged her family, driven to the edge of the continent, and killed them all. The coroner's inquest that followed was devastating. Testimony from social workers, neighbors, and school officials painted a clear picture. The Hart children had been abused, neglected, and isolated for years. The crash was the final act of control by two women who would rather see the children dead than let them be taken away. The story became known as the Hart family murders. Documentaries, podcasts, and long-form articles dissected every detail. Multiple states had passed reports of abuse along, but the family's constant moving and careful image management let them slip through the cracks. The case sparked outrage not only for the murders, but for what they represented. 6 black children had been placed with white adoptive parents, who paraded them as props in a social justice performance, while secretly starving and beating them. Comment sections filled with fury. How could a viral hug photo mask years of suffering? How could CPS fail so badly, again and again, while children begged for food? Jennifer Hart's name is now synonymous with betrayal. She wasn't just a bad mother. She weaponized motherhood. She used social media to create a mask of love and progressive virtue, while in reality, her children lived in hunger and fear. The cliff where the SUV went over has since become a grim landmark, a place where people still leave flowers and crosses. For many, it represents the dark side of image making, the danger of believing what looks good on the surface, and the horror of a parent who would rather destroy than let go. Jennifer Hart will never face a courtroom. There will be no sentencing, no prison cell. Her punishment was delivered instantly at the bottom of that cliff. But for the 6 children who never had a voice, the question remains, how many people saw the warning signs and chose to look away?
Why did they think it was okay to do the things that you did to a little, real little girl, my little girl? I would never get to hear my daughter call me mommy. I would never get to see her graduate. I would never get to see her go to college. I would never get to see her get married.
March 2020, Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. A 3-year-old girl named Bella Seachrist was rushed to the hospital. She was unresponsive, covered in bruises, and suffering from catastrophic internal injuries. Doctors tried to save her, but it was too late. Bella died shortly after arrival. The woman responsible wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random intruder. It was her stepmother, Laura Ramirez. At first, Ramirez told doctors Bella had fallen down the stairs, but the medical staff immediately knew that was a lie. The injuries were too severe, too widespread. Bella's body told a different story. Severe injuries across her torso, visible bruises on her face, and swelling on her skin. This wasn't one fall. This was systematic abuse. Detectives from the Westmoreland County District Attorney's Office launched an investigation. What they uncovered was a pattern of cruelty stretching back months. Bella lived in constant fear inside her own home. Ramirez beat her repeatedly, starved her, and isolated her from family. The abuse escalated until one final assault ruptured Bella's internal organs, killing her. Prosecutors described the crime as torture. Witnesses testified Ramirez screamed at Bella daily, calling her names, berating her, and using physical punishment that went far beyond discipline. Neighbors reported hearing disturbing noises from the home, but never realizing how bad it was until it was too late. What made the case particularly disturbing was the motive. Ramirez wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't suffering from a sudden breakdown. She simply didn't want Bella around. Friends said Ramirez resented the responsibility of caring for another woman's child. She saw Bella not as a daughter to raise, but as an obstacle in her relationship with Bella's father. When the case went to trial in 2022, the jury heard the full scope of Ramirez's violence. Photos of Bella's injuries were shown in court. Medical experts explained how much pain the little girl would have endured before her death, and prosecutors highlighted Ramirez's complete lack of remorse. In fact, investigators revealed that even as Bella was dying, Ramirez delayed seeking help. Rather than calling 911 immediately, she waited, lied, and only brought Bella to the hospital when it was already too late. That delay, prosecutors argued, showed intent. She had chosen control over compassion. The jury didn't take long to decide. Laura Ramirez was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. At sentencing, the judge told her she had stripped a child of her life with cruelty that defied humanity. For Bella's family, the verdict was justice, but not closure. Her biological mother wept in court, saying Bella was a happy, loving little girl whose life had been stolen before it truly began. Community members held vigils with candles and balloons, demanding stronger protections for children in abusive homes. The outrage was amplified by how preventable it felt. Bella's injuries were not hidden. Neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances had glimpses of the abuse, but none realized the extent until the funeral notices went out. The case raised urgent questions about whether more oversight and intervention could have saved her. Laura Ramirez sits in a Pennsylvania prison today, condemned to spend the rest of her life behind bars. But her name will live on as one of the women who embodied the archetype of the evil stepmother in the worst way possible, not through fairy tales, but through the real screams of a child who should have been safe in her care.
Was your mom capable of carrying his body in a suitcase, picking it up, and throwing over a bridge rail in Pensacola, Florida?
Yes.
You still love your mother? I'll strike that, Your Honor.
January 27th, 2020. Colorado Springs, Colorado. 11-year-old Gannon Stauch was reported missing by his stepmother, Letecia. She told police he had gone to play with a friend and never came home. At first, it seemed like a runaway case. Flyers went out. Search teams scoured the area. Press conferences were held. But what Letecia didn't know was that investigators were already suspicious. Her story didn't add up. Her behavior didn't match that of a panicked stepmother, and within weeks, the truth emerged. Gannon hadn't run away. He had been murdered inside his own home by the woman who was supposed to protect him. The investigation revealed a story of brutality, cover-up, and a stepmother whose lies unraveled piece by piece. When detectives searched the Stauch home, they found disturbing evidence. In Gannon's bedroom, blood spatter was detected on the walls, the carpet, and under his bed. There was so much evidence that investigators concluded he could not have survived without immediate medical help. Letecia tried to explain it away, but every lie made her look guiltier. She told one officer that Gannon had cut his foot and bled a little. Forensics proved it was far more than that. She claimed he had gone to a friend's house, but no friends had seen him. She claimed he had gone hiking with her and suffered an accident. None of it fit the evidence. Meanwhile, Neighbors came forward with video footage from security cameras. One clip showed Gannon getting into Letecia's truck on the morning of January 27th. Hours later, the truck returned, but Gannon was nowhere to be seen. That footage became one of the most damning pieces of evidence in the case. As the search stretched on, Letecia's behavior grew stranger. She gave rambling interviews to the media, blaming everyone from her husband's ex-wife to random intruders. She even suggested Gannon had been trafficked, spinning theories that investigators immediately dismissed. Instead of helping the search, she seemed more focused on protecting herself. 2 months later, the search ended. Gannon's body was found stuffed in a suitcase, dumped under a bridge in Florida, over 1,300 miles away from Colorado. He had been stabbed 18 times, beaten, and shot once in the jaw. His stepmother had not only killed him, she had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide his body. The trial in 2023 revealed the full scope of Letecia's cruelty. Prosecutors showed jurors the blood evidence, the security footage, and her bizarre shifting stories. They argued she had grown resentful of caring for Gannon and snapped, unleashing her rage on the boy. Witnesses described her as manipulative and narcissistic. She insisted she was innocent, even as the evidence piled up against her. She tried to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming she suffered from dissociative identity disorder, but psychiatric experts testified she was faking. She was fully aware of what she had done. The jury took just a few hours to convict her of first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, and tampering with a corpse. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole. For Gannon's family, it was a bittersweet victory. His father, Albert, sat in the courtroom, listening to the gruesome details of how his wife murdered his son. His biological mother, Landon, spoke through tears, calling Gannon a hero who deserved to be remembered for his kindness, not his brutal death. The public followed every moment of the case. Press conferences from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office drew national attention. Body cam footage from the day Gannon was reported missing went viral. And when the suitcase containing his remains was shown in court, it became one of the most haunting exhibits in recent memory. What makes the Stauch case stand out is how calculated it was. This wasn't a sudden outburst followed by panic. Letecia cleaned blood from the crime scene, moved his body across state lines, and wove a web of lies to mislead police and the media. She carried on interviews while knowing Gannon was already dead, smiling into cameras as if she were the victim. The betrayal cut deep. Gannon trusted her. He got into that truck, believing his stepmother would keep him safe. Instead, she turned on him with knives, a gun, and her fists.
But it wasn't until I heard and saw what you said and did in this trial that I think we all realized how evil you really are.
January 17th, 2020. Center Moriches, Long Island. An 8-year-old boy named Thomas Valva collapsed in his father's garage. His body temperature was just 76 degrees Fahrenheit. He had been locked inside the freezing garage overnight, without warmth, without support, without help. Hours later, he was gone. The woman at the center of this horror wasn't Thomas's biological mother. It was his father's fiancée, Angela Pollina, the stepmother figure who turned the family home into a prison. The abuse had gone on for years. Thomas and his 2 brothers, all on the autism spectrum, were starved, beaten, and humiliated by Angela and their father, Michael Valva, a New York City police officer. While Michael wore a badge in public, at home he was a tyrant, and Angela was his enforcer. Testimony revealed that Angela despised the boys from the start. She called them disgusting animals, and worse. She forced them to sleep on bare floors, denied them access to bathrooms, and locked them outside in the cold as punishment. Teachers at their school repeatedly reported that the boys were showing up hungry, bruised, and smelling of urine because they weren't allowed to use the toilet at home. On the night of January 16th, 2020, Angela and Michael escalated the abuse to the point of murder. In the middle of a freezing Long Island winter, with temperatures dipping into the teens, they forced Thomas and his brother Anthony into the garage as punishment for making a mess. There were no blankets, no coats, no heating. The children were trapped in cement cold, while the adults slept comfortably inside. By morning, Thomas was in medical crisis. Surveillance cameras installed in the home, which Angela herself had set up to monitor the boys, captured the chilling aftermath. Instead of rushing him to the hospital, Angela and Michael hosed him down with cold water, trying to clean him up. They wasted precious time as the boy's body shut down. By the time he was taken to the hospital, it was too late. Thomas Valva had died of hypothermia. The case shook New York, not only because of the brutality, but because Michael Valva was an NYPD officer. The betrayal of trust was staggering. And yet, it was Angela Pollina, the stepmother figure, who the jury found had played a driving role in Thomas's torture. At trial in 2023, prosecutors laid bare the horrifying reality of life inside that house. They showed the surveillance footage. They presented text messages where Angela referred to the boys as garbage and mocked their suffering. They revealed that she had cancelled heating in parts of the home to save money, knowing the children would be forced to endure the cold. Teachers testified to reporting the abuse again and again, but the system failed. Child Protective Services visited the home multiple times, but didn't remove the boys. In the end, the neglect from outside agencies cost Thomas his life. The defense tried to shift blame to Michael, painting Angela as a passive partner, but jurors didn't buy it. The evidence showed she was deeply involved in the abuse and cruelty. In March 2023, Angela Pollina was convicted of second-degree murder and child endangerment. The judge sentenced her to 25 years to life. Michael Valva was separately convicted and also given 25 to life. At sentencing, the judge's words were blistering. Angela's conduct had been inhumane, callous, and devoid of empathy. The public response was explosive. New York tabloids plastered Thomas's smiling face across front pages. Vigils were held outside the Valva home. Community members wept openly at the idea of a little boy dying in the cold while adults ignored his screams. The visuals from the case made it even more powerful. Photos of Thomas smiling in his school uniform were contrasted against courtroom footage of Angela staring blankly ahead as the jury read guilty. Police handouts, trial sketches, and the garage itself became symbols of betrayal. For true crime followers, the case is unforgettable because of its sheer cruelty. Hypothermia isn't quick. Thomas would have suffered for hours as his body shut down, shivering until he could no longer move. Angela Pollina could have stopped it at any moment. She could have opened the garage door, wrapped him in a blanket, or called for help. Instead, she chose silence. And that's what makes Angela Pollina stand out among the most evil stepmothers.
The children's bodies were found with just bones left behind because they had been out in the woods for months before being discovered.
Some killers make excuses. Some claim a moment of rage or a single mistake. But others carry out cruelty over weeks, months, even years, turning a home into a torture chamber. That was the story of Heather Keaton, a woman who entered two children's lives as a stepmother figure and ended up on Alabama's death row for their murders. In 2010, Mobile, Alabama police received a call from a man named John DeBlas. He admitted his two young children, Chase, 3 years old, and Natalie, 4 years old. Their bodies, he said, had been hidden in different parts of the state. He pointed the finger at his common-law wife, Heather Keaton. But his detectives dug in. They realized both adults had taken part in one of the most disturbing child abuse cases Alabama had ever seen. Chase and Natalie lived in constant terror. According to court testimony, Heather despised the children from the moment she entered the home. She saw them not as family, but as obstacles. She began by isolating them, locking them in closets, denying them food, and forcing them to stand for hours in painful positions. When they cried, the punishments grew harsher. One of Heather's methods was especially cruel. She forced the children to stand for hours on end with heavy objects balanced in their hands. If they dropped them, they were beaten. At other times, she tied them up with duct tape or forced them to drink dangerous chemicals. Chase, the youngest, was reportedly made to drink bleach. The children grew so neglected that neighbors noticed their weak appearance. But like so many cases on this list, the abuse remained hidden behind closed doors until it was too late. By mid-1910, both children were dead. Chase was killed first. His remains were abandoned in the woods near Citronelle, Alabama. Months later, Natalie was killed and left in a different location, near the Florida border. Their bodies weren't found until late that year, after John confessed. The horror of the case wasn't just the abuse itself, it was how long it had gone on, and how both adults blamed each other after the fact. John DeBlas admitted to disposing of the bodies, but insisted Heather was the ringleader. Heather claimed John was violent and that she had tried to protect the children. The evidence told a different story. Both were guilty, but Heather was especially cruel. At Heather's trial in 2015, prosecutors painted her as the driving force. They showed text messages where she referred to the children as disgusting and complained about having to care for them. Witnesses testified she often referred to them as not mine and said she didn't want them in her house. Experts described her as manipulative and cold. The jury didn't hesitate. Heather Keaton was convicted of capital murder for the deaths of Chase and Natalie. The judge sentenced her to death, making her one of the few women on Alabama's death row. John DeBlas received a death sentence as well. For the families of Chase and Natalie, the details were unbearable. Photos of the children smiling before they were placed with their father contrasted with courtroom descriptions of their final months, tied up, starved, beaten, and eventually killed by the adults who should have loved them most. The case has continued to resurface in Alabama news because Heather's legal team has filed multiple appeals. Each time, the courts have upheld her conviction and death sentence. In 2023, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals once again rejected her claims, keeping her on death row. The public outrage has never faded. Comment sections fill with fury whenever her name appears in headlines. Many point out how rare it is for women to receive the death penalty in the US, a fact that underlines just how extreme her crimes were. Others argue the system failed Chase and Natalie long before their deaths, allowing two unstable adults to control their lives unchecked. What makes Heather's case stand out among evil stepmothers is the sheer sadism. Some killers act in sudden rage, others try to hide their violence. Heather Keaton carried out sustained torture day after day until two children's bodies gave out. And even then, she denied responsibility, refusing to admit guilt even after overwhelming evidence. Today, she sits on death row at Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Alabama. Whether she will ever face execution remains uncertain, but her name will always be linked with the ultimate betrayal. A stepmother who turned her home into a place of fear, abuse, and death.
Sara's death was an incident. We are willing to cooperate with the UK authorities and fight our case in court.
I physically punished my daughter and she died.
August 10th, 2023. A frantic 1999 call was made from Pakistan to police in England. On the other end of the line was a man named Irfan Sharif, the father of a 10-year-old girl named Sara. He told authorities to go to his home in Woking, Surrey. When officers arrived, they found Sara lying alone in bed. She was bruised, battered, and dead. Her stepmother, Bainash Batul, had already fled the country. Along with Irfan and 5 other relatives, she boarded a flight to Pakistan just hours before Sara's body was discovered. That escape attempt set off an international manhunt and turned Sara's case into one of the most notorious child abuse trials in the UK. The autopsy results were devastating. Sara had suffered multiple and extensive injuries. Marks covered her face, her torso, her limbs. Medical examiners determined she had endured sustained abuse over a prolonged period, not a single fatal blow. The cause of death was recorded as multiple injuries, likely inflicted over time. Prosecutors later described it as nothing less than torture. Neighbors said they had seen little of Sara in the months before her death. She had been withdrawn from school, cutting her off from teachers who might have spotted the signs of abuse. Friends who once played with her no longer saw her outside. She was isolated, hidden from view, living entirely under the control of her father and stepmother. When investigators pieced the story together, it became clear Sara's life had been defined by fear. Witnesses said Batul resented Sara deeply, seeing her as a burden and an outsider in the home. The abuse grew worse in the weeks leading up to her death. Authorities later presented evidence that Sara had been subjected to beatings and humiliation as a form of discipline. But what made the case explode into headlines was the escape. While Sara's body lay inside the house, her father and stepmother were already thousands of miles away, hiding in Pakistan. The flight was booked last minute. Their relatives in Pakistan tried to shield them from extradition. For weeks, the couple went underground, avoiding police, while British and Pakistani authorities worked together to track them down. In September 2023, footage surfaced of Batul reading from a written statement while hiding in Pakistan. Her voice was flat, emotionless, as she insisted Sara's death had been an accident. The video sparked outrage. Viewers pointed out her complete lack of grief, her robotic delivery, and the fact that she was speaking publicly while refusing to face trial. Eventually, under mounting pressure, Pakistani police arrested Batul, Irfan, and several relatives. They were extradited to the UK, where they were charged with murder and child cruelty. The trial at the Old Bailey in 2024 revealed the true horror of Sara's final months. Prosecutors described a campaign of abuse led by Batul, with Irfan complicit. The court heard how Sara was beaten regularly, forced into humiliating punishments, and denied basic care. One chilling detail: Sara often slept on the floor, bruised and exhausted, while the adults carried on as if nothing was wrong. The judge didn't hold back. He told Batul and Irfan they had subjected Sara to a life of cruelty and fear, and that their actions amounted to torture. Both were convicted of murder. Irfan received a minimum term of 40 years. Binash Batul received life, with a minimum of 33 years before the possibility of parole. The case reverberated across the UK and internationally. Media outlets ran Sara's smiling school photos alongside images of Batul in court, her expression cold and blank. Police handouts from the crime scene circulated widely, cementing the case in public memory. Comment sections filled with fury. Many called for harsher sentences. Others blamed social services, pointing out that Sara had been withdrawn from school months earlier and should have been checked on. What makes the Batul case especially chilling is how recent it is. This didn't happen decades ago. It happened in 2023, in a modern British city, with all the safeguards supposedly in place. And yet, a little girl was tortured to death by the very people who were meant to raise her. Sara Sharif's short life ended at 10 years old. Her story will be told for years as another warning that evil doesn't just live in fairy tales. It can be found in the woman a child is told to call Mom. In June 2020, during the COVID lockdown in England, 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes was murdered by his stepmother, Emma Tustin. His case shocked the nation, not only because of the brutality, but because of the overwhelming evidence of prolonged torture. Arthur's biological mother was in prison at the time, leaving him in the care of his father, Thomas Hughes, and his new partner, Tustin. Instead of protection, Arthur entered a nightmare. The abuse began almost immediately. Arthur was denied food. He was made to stand for up to 14 hours a day in isolation. He was poisoned with salt. He was beaten, humiliated, and cut off from his extended family. Teachers and relatives noticed changes in his behavior before lockdown: weight loss, bruises, visible fear. But once schools closed, the abuse was hidden behind the walls of the Tustin home. Evidence later revealed the full extent of what Arthur endured. Tustin recorded audio clips on her phone where Arthur could be heard crying, "No one loves me. No one is going to feed me." Those words became the defining symbol of his suffering. CCTV cameras inside the home showed Arthur struggling to stand, collapsing as he tried to pick up a duvet from the floor. Instead of helping him, Tustin mocked him. In text messages, she bragged about starving and punishing him. She called him Satan and devil spawn. She sent updates to Hughes, who encouraged the cruelty, telling her to just end him. On June 16, 2020, Tustin delivered the fatal attack. Prosecutors said she violently shook Arthur and struck his head against a hard surface. The blow caused devastating injuries. When paramedics arrived, Arthur was unresponsive. He was rushed to Birmingham Children's Hospital, but died the next day. Doctors testified that Arthur's injuries were consistent with repeated shaking and impact trauma. His body also showed signs of chronic neglect, undernourishment, multiple marks, and abnormally high levels of salt in his system. The trial at Coventry Crown Court in late 2021 revealed every grim detail. Prosecutors presented the audio recordings and CCTV clips, forcing the jury to hear Arthur's final words and see his physical collapse. They also presented hundreds of text messages between Tustin and Hughes. In one, Hughes instructed Tustin not to feed Arthur lunch. In another, he encouraged harsher punishments. Tustin's defense argued she had lost control and never intended to kill Arthur. They claimed Hughes pressured her into discipline she couldn't handle, but the evidence demolished those claims. Tustin had documented the abuse herself. She knew what she was doing, and she mocked the suffering of a child as entertainment. The jury convicted Tustin of murder and multiple counts of child cruelty. Hughes was convicted of manslaughter and child cruelty. Tustin received life imprisonment with a minimum of 29 years. Hughes was sentenced to 21 years. The case ignited national outrage. Arthur's face appeared on front pages across Britain. Candlelit vigils were held, with thousands of people leaving flowers, toys, and football memorabilia at makeshift memorials. Comment sections overflowed with anger, many demanding whole-life orders for both Tustin and Hughes. Politicians weighed in. Then Prime Minister Boris Johnson called the case appalling and said it exposed major failings in child protection. Social services had been warned multiple times about Arthur's situation. Relatives had contacted authorities. A teacher raised concerns about bruises and behavior, yet no intervention came. Lockdown restrictions gave Tustin and Hughes total control, and Arthur was left to die in silence. But what makes Arthur's case stand out is the weight of direct evidence. The public didn't just hear second-hand reports. They heard Arthur's own voice on audio recordings. They saw him collapse on CCTV. They read the messages where his father and stepmother plotted his torment. Those recordings strip away any doubt. Arthur was tortured by the people who should have cared for him most. And the cruelty wasn't hidden. It was documented in real time by the killers themselves. Even after conviction, Emma Tustin showed no remorse. Court reporters described her as emotionless during sentencing, avoiding the eyes of Arthur's relatives. She never apologized. She never explained why she'd targeted Arthur so relentlessly. She simply sat in silence, as if the child's suffering meant nothing. Arthur's story has since been used in campaigns for stronger child protection laws. His name appears in parliamentary debates. His photo is carried at rallies. For the public, his words, "No one loves me," remain one of the most haunting reminders of what child abuse looks like when ignored. Emma Tustin now spends her days in a prison cell, despised even among other inmates. But for most people, her punishment will never feel enough, because no sentence can balance the horror of a 6-year-old boy left to starve, cry, and finally die in a house filled with cameras. And Arthur's last words prove the truth. He knew no one was coming to save him. Some of these stepmothers got life, some even got death, but no punishment will ever equal what their victims endured. These were children who deserved protection, safety, and love. Instead, they got betrayal, torture, and death at the hands of the women they were told to call Mum. The evil stepmother isn't just a fairy tale, it's real. And as these cases show, sometimes the monster is already inside the home. For more true crime documentaries like this one, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next story.